The sky broke open on a Tuesday. It was not a gentle thing. It was not a slow reveal like clouds parting after a storm. It was violent. It was sudden. One moment the sky above the southern Pacific Ocean was clear and blue and full of nothing but wind and sunlight. And the next moment there was a hole in it, a rip, a wound in the fabric of the world itself, glowing white and purple. At the edges, screaming with a sound that no human ear had ever heard before. And from that wound something fell. It was enormous. That was the first thing anyone could say about it. Enormous in a way that made the brain stop working for a moment, because the brain was not built to understand things that big, moving that fast. It was dark. It was twisted. It was shaped like no aircraft or spacecraft that any human engineer had ever drawn on paper or built in a factory. It looked like someone had taken a building, a very large building, perhaps 10 city blocks long, and crushed it, bent it, broken it, and then thrown it across the universe like a piece of trash, because that is exactly what had happened. The object hit the Pacific Ocean approximately 900 km west of the Chilean coast at 3:47 p.m. local time. The impact was not like a meteor strike. There was no explosion of fire and rock. Instead, the object seemed to slow itself at the last moment, as if some ancient and failing system inside it was still trying to do its job, still trying to land, still trying to function. Even though everything else had given up, it hit the water at an angle. We're carving a trench through the ocean that was almost 2 kilometers long. The displacement of water created a wave that was 30 meters high at its peak. That wave reached the coast of Chile in just under 2 hours. It reached New Zealand 6 hours later. It was not the worst tsunami in recorded history, but it was close. 17,000 people died that day, and nobody came to say sorry. The world reacted the way the world always reacted to things it did not understand. It panicked. News networks ran continuous coverage. Satellites were redirected. Military ships from 12 different nations raced toward the crash site. Fighter jets from the United States, China, and Russia circled the area at high altitude. We, their pilots, staring down at the dark shape, half submerged in the ocean and feeling something cold and heavy settle in their stomachs, because even from 30,000 ft, even through the cameras and the sensors and the layers of technology that separated them from the thing in the water, every single one of those pilots could tell that it was not from Earth. It was not human. It was not anything that belonged in this solar system. It was alien. The United Nations held an emergency session within 6 hours of the impact. The Secretary General stood at the podium and said words like unprecedented and global cooperation and calm. Nobody felt calm, and the President of the United States addressed the nation from the Oval Office and said that the military was monitoring the situation and that there was no immediate threat. Nobody believed that either. The truth was that nobody knew anything. The object sat in the water, half sunk, leaking strange radiation that made Geiger counters click in patterns that physicists had never seen before. It did not move. It did not broadcast. It did not open. It just sat there like a dead whale washed up on a beach, slowly settling into the mud of the ocean floor. For 3 weeks the world watched and waited and argued. Some people said it was a weapon. Some people said it was a gift. Some people said it was a test from God. Some people said it was the end of the world. Religious leaders gave sermons, scientists gave press conferences, conspiracy theorists gave everyone a headache, and then Dr. Lena Vasquez figured out what it actually was. Lena Vasquez was 43 years old. She was born in Buenos Aires, raised in Madrid, educated at MIT, and employed by the European Space Agency. She had dark hair that she kept short, because long hair got in the way of thinking, and she had brown eyes that always looked like they were solving a problem even when she was sleeping. She was not the most famous scientist in the world. She was not the most decorated, but she was by almost universal agreement among the people who knew her the most stubborn. She had been assigned to the UN Reclamation Task Force, hastily assembled group of scientists and engineers from 31 countries whose job was to figure out what the object was, where it came from, and what to do with it. The task force was based on a converted aircraft carrier, the USS Ronald Reagan, which had been parked 3 km from the crash site and was now serving as a floating laboratory. Lena spent the first 2 weeks running scans, collecting samples of the strain, radiation, and arguing with military officials who wanted to blow the thing up. She did not sleep much. She ate when someone put food in front of her. She drank coffee like it was water, and water like it was an afterthought. On the 15th day, her team made a breakthrough. They found a signal. It was faint. It was buried under layers of noise and interference from the damaged systems inside the object, but it was there, a repeating pattern of electromagnetic pulses that was clearly not natural. It was artificial. It was structured. It was without any doubt a language. Melina sent the signal data to every linguistics lab, every AI research center, and every codering agency on the planet. She told them all the same thing: drop whatever you are doing. Translate this now. It took 11 days. An AI linguistics lab in Seoul, South Korea, was the first to crack it. The lab was run by a quiet man named Dr. Park Juno, who had spent his entire career teaching machines to understand human languages, and who now found himself teaching a machine to understand something that was very much not human. The signal was not a message to Earth. It was not a greeting. It was not a warning. It was an automated distress beacon, the alien equivalent of a black box recorder on an airplane. It was broadcasting the ship's identification, its origin, its cargo manifest, and the reason for its failure, and it was broadcasting this information not to Earth but to whoever had built it, in case they ever bothered to come looking. Dr. Park translated the core data and sent it to Lena Vasquez in a classified file. Lena read it sitting in her small cabin on the aircraft carrier, alone with a cup of cold coffee in her hand. She read it once, then she read it again. Then she put the coffee down and stared at the wall for a very long time. The ship was called Keth Veron. In the language of its builders, a species called the Vithari, this translated roughly to lame drifter. It was a cargo hauler, not a warship, not an exploration vessel, not a diplomatic transport, a cargo hauler. It was the alien equivalent of a freight truck, a big, slow, and ugly machine designed to carry heavy things from one place to another across the vast distances between stars. The Keth Veron had suffered a catastrophic failure in its primary drive system, something the translation called a subspace fold Engine. This engine was what allowed the ship to travel faster than light. Without it, the ship was stranded, dead. In the water, as humans would say. Crew. There had been a crew of 47. Vithari had been evacuated by a rescue vessel. The ship itself had been deemed non-rovable. That was the word the translation used. Non-rovable. Not worth saving, not worth fixing, not worth towing back to a shipyard or stripping for parts. The Vithari had looked at the Keth Ver on the way. Person might look at an old car with a blown engine sitting in a ditch on the side of the road, and they had shrugged. They had walked away, they had left it to rot, but they had not left it where it broke down. They had moved it, they had pushed it using the rescue vessel to a nearby star system and dumped it there. In the star system they had chosen was Sol, Earth star, Earth's home. The reason was in the file. It was short, it was clinical, it was the single most insulting sentence that any human being had ever read. The Sol system had been selected as a disposal site because it was listed in the Galactic Union Registry of Catalog Systems as a precont non-relevant biosphere, no strategic value, no resource significance, no sapient civilization of developmental note. Lena read that sentence 5 times. She felt something move through her body. It started in her stomach, hot and tight in her, and it rose up through her chest and into her throat. It was not fear, it was not sadness, it was not even surprise. Not really, because some part of her had always suspected that the universe was big and cold and did not care about one small blue planet orbiting one ordinary yellow star. Number what she felt was anger, not the loud explosive kind of anger, not the kind that makes people shout and throw things. It was the quiet kind, the deep kind, the kind that settles into the bones and stays there, burning slowly like coal in a furnace. The kind of anger that does not go away. The kind that builds things. She called an emergency meeting of the task force leadership. She stood at the front of the room surrounded by admirals and generals and scientists from a dozen countries, and she told them what the signal said, how she told them about the Vithari. She told them about the Galactic Union, an alliance of over 9,000 space-faring civilizations that stretched across the galaxy. She told them that Earth was listed in this alliance's records as irrelevant, as nothing, as a place where you dump your garbage, because nobody there will ever be smart enough to complain about it. The room was silent for a long time after she finished. Then Admiral James Chen of the United States Navy, a man who had commanded aircraft carriers and submarine fleets and who had a face like a stone wall, leaned forward in his chair and said, "So they think we are a trash can?" "Yes," said Lena, "and that thing out there in the water," he said, pointing toward the window, toward the ocean, toward the dark shape sitting in the waves, is their trash." "Yeah," said Lena again. Admiral Chen looked around the room. He looked at the Russian general with the thick eyebrows. He looked at the Chinese admiral with the calm face. He looked at the British scientist with the nervous hands. He looked at all of them one by one, and then he looked back at Lena. "Dr. Vasquez," he said, "I have been in the Navy for 34 years. I have fought in 2 wars. I have buried friends. I have made decisions that kept me awake at night for years, but I have never been this angry." "Good," said Lena, "because I need your help." The news could not be contained. Within days, leaked documents and translated fragments of the alien signal were everywhere, on news channels, on social media, on the front pages of every newspaper in the world. The reaction was exactly what Lena had expected. People were angry, not just governments, not just militaries. People, ordinary people in ordinary homes, in ordinary cities on every continent on Earth. They were angry because the insult was not aimed at one country or one race or one religion. It was aimed at all of them. Every human being who had ever lived, every civilization that had ever risen and fallen, every invention and discovery and work of art and act of courage that humanity had ever produced, all of it. Every last bit of it had been weighed and measured by an alien civilization and found to be worth nothing less than nothing, worth a dumping ground. There were protests, but they were not the usual kind. Nobody was protesting against each other. For perhaps the first time in recorded history, the anger of the entire human race was pointed in the same direction, outward, upward. Hurry at the stars. And beneath the anger, something else was growing, something quieter and more dangerous, something that lived in laboratories and engineering firms and military research facilities, in university lecture halls. It was the thing that had always separated humans from every other creature on their small blue planet. It was not intelligence exactly. Other species on Earth were intelligent. It was not tool use. Other species used tools. It was something harder to name, something that made a human look at a mountain and think, I will cross that. Something that made a human look at an ocean and think, I will sail that. Something that made a human look at the moon and think, I will walk on that. It was the refusal to accept limits, the inability to hear the word impossible without treating it as a personal challenge. The Galactic Union had looked at humanity and seen nothing, a species confined to a single planet, burning fossil fuels, fighting among themselves, unable to even leave their own solar system in any meaningful way. By galactic standards, humans were infants. Less than infants, they were bacteria. They were irrelevant. The Galactic Union had made a mistake, because now those irrelevant bacteria were standing on the deck of an aircraft carrier staring at a broken alien ship, and they were not thinking about how to be afraid. They were thinking about how to take it apart, how to understand it, how to learn from it, how to use it. Lena stood on the flight deck of the Ronald Reagan. As the sun set over the Pacific, the sky was painted in shades of orange and red and purple, and the alien wreck rose from the water like a dark island, make its strange angles and impossible geometry silhouetted against the dying light. The wind pulled at her jacket, and her short hair and the salt spray touched her face like cold fingers. Her colleague, Dr. Kofi Asante, stood beside her. He was a young engineer from Ghana, tall, thin, brilliant, and possessed of a quiet confidence that Lena had recognized the first moment she met him. He was 31 years old, and he had already published more papers on exotic energy systems than most physicists published in a lifetime. He had been studying the radiation patterns coming from the wreck for days, and the look on his face was one that Lena had seen before on the faces of engineers who had just realized that everything they thought they knew was only the beginning. The power systems, he said, not looking at her, his eyes fixed on the wreck, even broken, even dead, they are producing Energy readings that should not exist. The materials in the hull, I do not even have names for some of them. The structural engineering alone is beyond anything we have ever conceived, and it is their garbage, said Lena. Kofi was quiet for a moment, then he turned to her, and there was something in his eyes that was not quite a smile but was close to it, something fierce, something hungry. If this is what they throw away, he said, imagine what they keep. Lena looked back at the wreck. The last light of the sun caught the alien metal, and for just a moment it seemed to glow, not with the radiation of a dying machine, but with something else, something that looked almost like possibility. They threw away their trash on our lawn, she said quietly. HFY, let us see what their trash can do. Behind them the aircraft carrier hummed with activity. Scientists unpacked equipment, engineers argued over schematics, military officers spoke in low, serious voices about security and logistics and supply chains. Around the world, governments were mobilizing, budgets were being rewritten, priorities were being rearranged, old rivalries were being set aside, not forgotten, not forgiven, but set aside because there was something bigger now, something that made all of the old fights seem very small and very petty. Humanity had received a message from the stars. The message was, you do not matter, and humanity in its stubborn, foolish, magnificent way had decided to write a reply. The reply would take years to compose. It would be written not in words but in metal and fire and the sweat of a species that refused to stay small. It would be written in laboratories and shipyards and launch facilities. It would be written by engineers and soldiers and scientists who would give up sleep and comfort and sometimes their lives to prove a single simple point: we are not garbage, and neither is anything you leave on our doorstep. The sun set, the stars came out, and somewhere far away, across the vast and indifferent darkness of space, 9,000 civilizations went about their business and did not think about Earth at all. That would change. They moved the ship in the winter of 2042. It was not easy. Nothing about the Keth Veron was easy. The wreck was 912 m long, 240 m wide at its broadest point, and massed approximately 14 million metric tons, which was, as one American engineer put it, about the same as a small mountain, except mountains have the decency to stay where you put them. The operation took 3 months. 12 of the largest cargo ships on Earth, a custom-built underwater cradle system that had to be invented from scratch, and the cooperation of 26 national navies. There were accidents, there were delays, there were arguments that nearly turned into international incidents. A French engineer and a Chinese engineer got into a fist fight over the correct way to attach a tow cable to alien hull plating. Both of them were right, as it turned out, because the alien hull plating did not behave according to any known rules of material science, but they moved it slowly, painfully on, and with the whole world watching on satellite feeds and news channels, they dragged the broken alien cargo hauler across 3,000 km of open ocean to its new home, a purpose-built facility on a small island in the South Pacific that had been until 6 months ago an uninhabited atoll used by nesting seabirds. The seabirds had been relocated. The atoll had been expanded with landfill and reinforced concrete. Small city had been built on top of it. Laboratories, machine shops, barracks. Power plant, a desalination facility. Hospital, and a runway long enough to land the heavy transport aircraft that would be arriving daily with equipment and personnel. The facility had no official name in public records. It was listed in classified documents as Site Prometheus on the project that operated within it was called Project Prometheus. The people who worked there simply called it the Forge. Dr. Lena Vasquez was put in charge. She had not asked for the job. She had not wanted it. She was an engineer, not an administrator. She liked solving problems with her hands in her mind, not with meetings and budgets and phone calls to politicians. But the UN Reclamation Task Force had looked at all the candidates and decided that the person who should lead the most important project in human history was the person who understood more deeply than anyone else what was at stake. They called us irrelevant, she told her team. On the first day, standing in a half-finished laboratory with ocean wind blowing through the open walls, every time you get tired, every time you want to quit, every time a problem seems impossible, remember that word, irrelevant, and then solve the problem. Anyway, there were 4,000 people at the Forge by the end of the first year. Engineers, physicists, chemists, biologists, computer scientists, material specialists, linguists, and military personnel from more than 40 countries. They spoke dozens of languages. They came from different cultures, different backgrounds, different traditions. Many of them did not like each other. Some of them actively hated each other, carrying the weight of old wars and old grudges. But they all hated the same thing more. They all hated that word irrelevant. The work began with cataloging. Before you could reverse engineer something, you had to understand what it was, and the Keth Veron was even as a ruin or the most complex object that human beings had ever encountered. Every wall, every conduit, every panel, every piece of the ship contained technology that was centuries beyond human capability. It was like handing a smartphone to a medieval blacksmith, except the smartphone was the size of a city, and the blacksmith had to figure it out without any instruction manual. The first major discoveries came in the area of material science. The hull of the Keth Veron was made of an alloy that no human had ever seen before. It was lighter than titanium, but stronger than anything on Earth. It could absorb impacts that would shatter steel. It resisted heat, cold, radiation, and corrosion. When you cut a piece off and examined it under an electron microscope, and you could see that its molecular structure was layered in a pattern that was clearly artificial, engineered at the atomic level for maximum strength and minimum weight. Dr. Sarah Kim, a material scientist from South Korea, spent 3 months studying a single whole plate when she finally published her findings in a classified report, not a journal, because nothing from the four was published publicly. She wrote, "This material is not just advanced, it is elegant. It is the work of a civilization that has been building things in space for so long that they have forgotten how difficult it is. They made this hall the way we make cardboard boxes, quickly, cheaply, without thinking about it. And it is better than anything we have ever made." That realization that the Keth Veron represented the Vitharis' lowest level of engineering at their cheapest work. Their least impressive technology hung over the forge like a storm cloud. It was terrifying, it was also motivating. The power systems were the next major focus. The ship had multiple energy sources, most of them damaged but still partially functional. The primary power plant was a device that human physicists eventually called a vacuum energy extractor, a machine that pulled energy directly from the quantum vacuum of space itself. This was a concept that human physicists had theorized about but had never come close to building. The Vither had built one, they had built it for a cargo truck. Kofi Asante led the team that studied the power systems. He was tireless. He worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week for months at a time. He lost weight. His eyes developed dark circles that never went away. His colleagues worried about him, but when they suggested he take a break, he would look at them with those fierce, hungry eyes and say, "A break? Do you think the Vithari are taking a break? Do you think they are sitting somewhere in the galaxy, resting while we try to catch up to them? No, they are not even thinking about us, and that is exactly why cannot stop." The vacuum energy extractor was too damaged to repair, but Kofi's team learned enough from it to understand the principles behind it. They could not build one, not yet, but they could see the path. They could see where human physics needed to go. It was like standing at the bottom of a mountain and being able to see the peak. For the first time, the mountain was enormous, but at least now they knew which direction to climb. In the meantime, they found other power sources on the ship that were more immediately useful. The secondary power grid ran on a network of what the team called exotic matter conduits, channels of material that existed in a state between matter and energy, capable of conducting and storing power with almost zero loss. Human engineers figured out how to interface these conduits with human-built fusion reactors, which had only recently become viable on Earth. The result was a hybrid power system that was more efficient than either technology alone. It was like connecting a garden hose to a fire hydrant. The human reactors provided the raw power, and the alien conduits delivered it with a precision and efficiency that human technology could not match. Then there were the gravity plates. When the floor of the Keth Veron were lined with devices that generated artificial gravity on the Vithari ship, these were a basic comfort feature like air conditioning in a human building. For humans, they were revolutionary. Artificial gravity meant that spacecraft no longer needed to spin to simulate weight. It meant that humans could build space stations and ships with floors and ceilings instead of floating in zero-G. It meant that the human body would not deteriorate in space. It was a single technology that solved 100 different problems at once. And then there was the drive, the subspace fold drive, the heart of the ship, the thing that had broken and caused the Keth Veron to be abandoned in the first place. It sat in the deepest part of the wreck in a chamber that was almost perfectly sealed. Even after the crash, it was enormous, a device the size of a 4-story building, made of materials that glowed faintly in the dark, surrounded by conduits and control systems that were the most complex technology on the entire ship. It was cracked. A fracture ran through its central core like a fault line through a continent. That fracture was why it had failed. That fracture was why the Vithari had abandoned the ship. That fracture was why humanity now had an alien wreck to study. The fold drive worked in theory based on the team's Analysis by folding space. It took 2 points in the universe that were far apart and brought them together like folding a piece of paper so that 2 distant corners touched. The ship would then slip through the fold, traveling what appeared to be a short distance but was actually light year. Sortie, it was faster than light travel. It was the technology that connected the galactic union. It was the technology that humanity needed if it ever wanted to leave its own solar system, and it was broken. Dozens of the best physicists and engineers on Earth spent months studying the fold drive. They mapped every component. They analyzed every material. They built computer models and ran simulations and argued about quantum mechanics and topology and dimensions that the human brain was not really designed to think about. They could not fix it. The fracture in the core had damaged the drive at a fundamental level. The materials needed to repair it did not exist on Earth and could not be manufactured with human technology. The full drive as a tool for faster than light travel was useless, but Kofi Asant was not looking at the fold drive as a tool for travel. He was looking at it as something else entirely. It happened on a Thursday evening, 7 months after the drive team had officially declared the fold engine non-repairable. Kofi was sitting alone in the drive chamber, surrounded by holographic displays showing the internal structure of the cracked core. He had been sitting there for hours. He had a tablet in his lap and a cold cup of coffee on the floor beside him, and he was staring at the fracture in the core with an expression that was halfway between frustration and meditation. The fold drive worked by creating a controlled distortion in space. That was its purpose, to bend space in a precise, targeted way so that a ship could slip through. The crack in the core meant that the distortion could not be controlled. It was too unstable, too unpredictable. Any attempt to use it for travel would tear the ship apart. But what if you did not want to travel? What if you wanted to tear something else apart? Kofi sat up straight. His coffee fell over. He did not notice. He began running calculations on his tablet. His fingers moved fast. His eyes moved faster. Numbers and equations filled the screen. Scrolled past were replaced by new numbers and new equations. He pulled up the simulation software and began building a new model, not of the fold drive as the Vithari had designed it, but of the fold drive as something they Vithari had never imagined, a weapon. The cracked core could not create a stable fold in space, but it could create an unstable one, a short-range violent distortion, a rift that would rip apart anything caught inside it, matter, any energy shields, whole plating, anything. The laws of physics inside the rift would be temporarily broken, and anything that depended on those laws to hold itself together would simply stop existing. Kofi ran the simulation, then he ran it again, then he ran it a third time with different parameters. The results were the same every time. It worked. He found Lena Vasquez in her office at 2 in the morning. She was still awake, of course. She was always awake. He showed her the simulations. She watched them in silence, her face very still, her brown eyes moving back and forth across the screen. A spatial distortion weapon, she said when he was finished. A cannon that tears holes in space. Yes, said Kofi, short range. Perhaps 50 to 100 km, but within that range, nothing could survive it. No material in the known universe could withstand a spatial rift. it would be. Like he paused, searching for the right words. It would be like trying to build a wall to stop an earthquake. The wall is not the problem, the ground beneath. The wall is the problem. This weapon does not attack the ship, it attacks the space that the ship is sitting in. Lena was quiet for a long time, then she said, the Veether built this drive to move cargo. They never even considered using it this way. No, said Kofi. Why would they? They have been a space-faring civilization for thousands of years. Their drive technology works. They build new ones when old ones break. They do not need to repurpose broken equipment because they have the resources to replace it. They think in straight lines. They see a broken drive, and they see garbage, and you see a broken drive, and you see a weapon. Kofi smiled. It was not a gentle smile. I am human, he said. We have been turning garbage into weapons since we learned to throw rocks. The discovery changed everything. Project Prometheus, which had been a research project, became something else. It became a construction project. The UN Security Council held a closed-door session that lasted 3 days. Every permanent member voted in favor. The resolution was classified at the highest level. They were going to rebuild the K-Thuron not as a cargo hauler, not as a research platform, not as a museum or a monument or a symbol. As a warship. The decision was not made lightly. There were arguments. There were objections. Yet some said that militarizing alien technology would provoke the Veethari. Some said that it was premature, that humanity should try diplomacy first. Some said that building a weapon of this magnitude was morally wrong. Lena listened to all of these arguments. She respected them. She understood them. And then she stood up in the Security Council chamber and said 6 words that ended the debate. They are already coming for it. She was right. 3 months earlier, the signals intelligence team at the Forge, a group of specialists who monitored deep space communications using equipment salvaged from the Keth Veron's own communication array, had detected something troubling far out in the galaxy, in the direction that the Veethari home world was believed to be. There was an increase in communication traffic referencing the solar system. The translations were incomplete, but certain words appeared again and again. Anomalous energy signatures, unauthorized technology activation, inspection required. The Veethari had noticed something at the Forge, perhaps the full drive experiments, perhaps the power system tests, perhaps something else entirely, had produced an energy signature that had traveled across the stars at the speed of light and arrived on someone's sensor screen. And now the Veether wanted to know why their garbage dump was glowing. 2 weeks after Lena's speech to the Security Council, the signals intelligence team intercepted a specific and terrifying communication of Veethari scout fleet. 5 vessels armed fast had been dispatched to the Sol system, and their mission was to inspect and reclaim Veethari property in the Sol system and assess indigenous activity. Their estimated time of arrival was 14 months. The Forge went into overdrive. The 4,000 workers became 8,000, then 12,000. Equipment and materials poured in from every corner of the globe. Factories that had been building cars and construction equipment were retold to build components designed by engineers who had studied alien technology. Governments that had been hoarding their best scientists in their Most advanced prototypes suddenly became generous because the threat was no longer theoretical. Something was coming, and humanity had 14 months to get ready. Kofi stood in the drive chamber watching a team of engineers carefully remove the cracked core of the fold drive. It would be rebuilt, restructured, and weaponized. He had designed the system himself. New configuration that he called the Rift Cannon. It would be the most powerful weapon ever created by human hands, built from the wreckage of an alien garbage truck. Lena came to stand beside him. She looked tired. She always looked tired now. 14 months, she said. It is enough, said Kofi. It has to be enough, and if it is not, he looked at. Sorry. Then we will make it enough. We always do. That is what they do not understand about us, Lena. The Vithari, the whole galactic union, they have resources, they have technology, they have 9,000 civilizations and thousands of years of space flight, but they have never been desperate. They have never been the small thing in the corner that everyone ignores and the thing that has to fight for every scrap. They do not know what that does to a species. They do not know what we are capable of when we have no choice. Lena looked at the full drive, the broken heart of a dead ship being carefully lifted out of its housing by human hands that were about to turn it into something the galaxy had never seen. No, she said softly. They do not. Outside the forge, the Pacific Ocean stretched to the horizon in every direction. The sun was setting as it always did, painting the water in golden red. Somewhere far beyond that water, beyond the atmosphere, beyond the moon and Mars, in the asteroid belt, in the great gas giants, beyond the edge of the solar system, where light itself grew thin and cold, 5 alien warships were racing toward Earth. They were coming to collect their garbage, and they had no idea what they were going to find. Instead, the first thing they did was gut it. Every non-essential system inside the Keth Veron was ripped out, cataloged, studied, and either repurposed or stored. The cargo bays, vast hollow chambers that had once held thousands of tons of Vithari trade goods, were emptied and reinforced. The crew quarters, designed for 47 aliens who were taller and thinner than humans, were torn down and rebuilt. The navigation systems, which had been designed for a creature with 4 eyes that could see and ultraviolet, were replaced with human design interfaces. The life support systems, which produced an atmosphere too rich in nitrogen and too thin in oxygen for human lungs, were reconfigured from the ground up. They kept the skeleton, the structural frame of the Keth Veron, its bones, what its spine, the deep architecture that held everything together, was sound. More than sound, it was magnificent. The Vethari had built the frame from a material that the human engineers called stellite, because they needed a name for it, and because it shone like starite when you cut it with a plasma torch. Stellite was stronger than any material on Earth. It was also lighter. A beam of stellite the length of a school bus weighed less than a compact car. The structural engineers who studied it said that the Keth Veron's frame could theoretically survive forces that would crush a planet's crust, and the Vethari had used this material to build a cargo truck. It was like building a shopping cart out of diamond. The rebuilding of the ship took place in 3 phases. The first phase was structural, gutting the old systems, in reinforcing the frame and expanding the ship's interior to accommodate human needs. The second phase was integration, installing human technology alongside alien technology, creating hybrid systems that use the best of both. The third phase was weaponization, turning a broken cargo hauler into the most dangerous machine in human history. Captain Raya Singh arrived at the fort on the first day of the second phase. She came by military transport, a gray aircraft that landed on the island's single runway at dawn. She stepped off the plane carrying one bag and wearing the uniform of the Indian Navy, which she had served in for 22 years. She was 46 years old. She had black hair that she wore pulled back in a tight bun. She had dark eyes that were calm and steady and gave away nothing. She had a thin scar on her left cheek from a helicopter crash in the Arabian Sea 12 years ago. And she had a reputation that was known in every navy on earth. Raya Singh did not lose. That was what people said about her, not that she always won. That was a different thing, a simpler thing. Raya Singh did not lose. She had commanded a destroyer in a naval exercise against the combined fleets of 3 nations and had not lost a single simulated engagement. She had flown combat missions in prototype aircraft that other pilots refused to touch. She had been offered desk jobs, promotions, comfortable positions far from danger, and she had turned down every one of them when the UN Defense Council had begun searching for someone to command the rebuilt alien ship. They had considered dozens of candidates: admirals, generals, astronauts, and more. Test pilots. They had evaluated experience, temperament, leadership, ability, tactical thinking, and 100 other qualities. In the end, the choice had been obvious. They did not need someone who could follow procedures. They needed someone who could face the completely unknown and make good decisions anyway. They needed someone who could command a crew from 40 different countries, flying a ship that had never existed before against an enemy that nobody had ever fought. They needed someone who could be afraid and still think clearly. Raya Singh was that person. Lena Vasquez met her on the runway. The 2 women shook hands. Lena was shorter, rounder, with wild dark hair and coffee stains on her lab coat. Raya was taller, leaner, with the precise posture of someone who had spent decades in military service, and they were very different people. They would become very good friends. "Welcome to the forge," said Lena. "Your ship is this way." "My ship," said Raya. The words felt strained in her mouth. She had commanded ships before, destroyers, frigates, even an aircraft carrier for a brief period. But this was different. This was something that had crossed the galaxy, something that had been built by hands that were not human, something that she was going to take into a fight that no human had ever fought. "Your ship," said Lena firmly. "Come, I will show you what we have done." They walked through the forge. It was enormous, sprawling, and chaotic in the way that all great construction projects are chaotic, organized on a level that was invisible to the untrained eye, but messy and loud and full of people shouting at each other in a dozen languages. Cranes lifted massive components. Welding torches threw sparks into the tropical air. Trucks carried materials along roads that had not existed a year ago. Everywhere there were people working, engineers in hard hats, scientists in lab coats, soldiers in uniform, technicians in overalls, all of them moving with a speed and purpose that Raya recognized. It was the energy of people who were building something that mattered, something that might save the world, and who knew that they did not have enough time. And then she saw the ship. It rose above the construction yard like a dark cathedral. It was still recognizable as the HFY. The basic shape was the same, the long, angular body that had once been a cargo hauler, but it was changed, transformed. When where the original ship had been bare and utilitarian, the rebuilt version was armored and aggressive. New hull plating had been added over the alien stellite frame, layers of composite material that human engineers had developed using principles learned from the alien hull. Sensor arrays bristled from the upper surfaces like the spines of a porcupine. Weapon mounts, still empty but clearly designed for something large and terrible, lined the flanks. Raya stood and looked at it for a long time. She did not speak. She did not need to. The ship spoke for itself. "We are calling it the UES Prometheus," said Lena. "United Earthship, the first of its kind." "The first," said Raya, "but not the last." "No, not the last. We are already building escort vessels. Smaller, faster, based on what we have learned. 12 frigates, and they will be ready in time." "In time for what?" Raya asked, though she already knew the answer. Lena's face darkened. "The V-Thari scout fleet, 5 warships. They will arrive in 9 months, perhaps less." 9 months? Raya had trained fighter pilots in 9 months. She had rebuilt the readiness of an entire naval squadron in 9 months. But she had never prepared for a battle against aliens in 9 months. Nobody in the history of humanity had ever had to do what she was about to do. "Show me the inside," which she said. They entered the ship through a boarding ramp that had been built into the lower hull. The interior was a strange and fascinating mix of alien and human. The corridors were wider than those on a human ship. The V-Thari had been taller, and their hallways reflected that, but they had been fitted with human lighting, human signage, and human safety equipment. The floors were alien gravity plates, still functional, providing a steady 1 g of simulated gravity. The walls were alien stellite, smooth and faintly luminous. The air smelled of metal and ozone, and something else, something faintly sweet, that Lena said was a byproduct of the alien power conduits. Lena led Raya through the ship, explaining each section. The crew quarters redesigned for a human complement of 350. The medical bay equipped with the best human surgical equipment. The mess hall, the recreation areas, the storage rooms, all human, all new, all built inside the shell of something alien. Then they reached the bridge. It was located in the forward section of the ship, waggle behind layers of armored hull. It was large, much larger than the bridge of any human vessel. The V-Thari had controlled their ships from centralized command centers, and the HFY's command center had been spacious even by their standards. Human engineers had kept the basic layout but had filled it with human technology. Workstations lined the walls, each one equipped with multiple screens and holographic displays. A central command chair. Raya's chair sat on a raised platform in the middle, surrounded by tactical displays that could show the ship's status, the surrounding space, and the positions of friendly and enemy vessels in real time. But the most important addition was not visible to the eye. It was the ship's brain. Human engineers had installed an artificial intelligence system, a network of quantum computers and neural processing units that was the most advanced AI ever built. The Vithari had not used AI on the Ketharan. They had not used AI on any of their ships as far as the human researchers could determine. Vithari vessels were crewed by living beings who operated the systems manually. This was not because the Vithari could not build AI. It was because they did not think they needed to. Their ships were reliable, their systems were well designed, their crews were well trained. Why add an artificial mind when living minds worked perfectly? Well, humans had a different philosophy. Humans had been building thinking machines for decades. They understood that in combat milliseconds mattered. Human brain could process information quickly, but an AI could process it faster. A human captain could make good decisions, but an AI could provide that captain with better information to make those decisions with. The AI on the Prometheus designated area, which stood for adaptive response intelligence architecture, was not designed to replace the human crew. It was designed to make them better. Area could monitor every system on the ship simultaneously. It could detect threats before human eyes could see them. It could calculate firing solutions, manage shield power distribution, coordinate damage control, and run tactical simulations in real time. It could do all of this while also managing the hybrid power grid, the life support systems, and the thousands of other functions that kept the ship alive and fighting. It was in a very real sense are the nervous system of the Prometheus. The crew was the brain. Area was everything else. The Vithari ships will not have anything like this, said Lena. Their combat doctrine is based on crew competence and technological superiority. They fight the way they build, with brute force and reliable systems. They do not adapt in real time. They do not need to, because they have always been the strongest force in any fight until now, said Raya. Until now. Lena agreed. The weapons were installed over the following months. The Rift cannon, Kofi Asant's creation, the weaponized full drive, was mounted in the forward section of the ship, integrated directly into the stellite frame. It was enormous. It occupied 3 entire decks and required its own dedicated power supply when fired, and it would create a spatial distortion, a rift in the fabric of space itself at a targeted point up to 100 km away. Anything caught in the rift would be torn apart at the molecular level. There was no known defense against it, because it did not attack matter or energy. It attacked space. It changed the rules of reality in a localized area, and anything that depended on those rules simply ceased to function. But the rift cannon was slow to charge and could only fire once every few minutes. It was a devastating weapon, but it was not enough on its own, so the human engineers added more rail guns, 48 of them, mounted batteries along both flanks of the ship. These were human weapons scaled up to a size that would have been impossible without alien materials and alien power systems. Now each rail gun accelerated a solid projectile to a significant fraction of the speed of light using electromagnetic force. The projectiles were made of depleted uranium, jacketed in stellite. At those speeds, each round carried the kinetic energy of a small nuclear weapon. They did not explode. They did not need to. They simply punched through whatever they hit. Missile pods, 240 launch tubes arranged in clusters across the upper and lower hull. The missiles carried warheads tipped with exotic matter shaped charges a technology that human engineers had developed by studying the alien power conduits. When detonated, these warheads released a burst of exotic matter that interacted catastrophically with conventional matter, creating an expanding sphere of destruction that could overwhelm energy shields and finally honey the shields themselves. The Keth Veron had carried basic shield emitters, another standard feature on V-Thari ships, used more for debris protection than combat. Human engineers had rebuilt and enhanced these emitters, layering them with human-designed electromagnetic barriers to create a multispectrum defensive system. It was not as strong as the shields on a purpose-built V-Thari warship, but it was unpredictable. It operated on frequencies and principles that V-Thari weapons were not calibrated to counter. There was one more system, one that Kofi had developed in secret, shared only with Lena and Raya. He called it the fold anchor, the cracked fold drive could not move the ship through space, but it could disrupt space around the ship. Specifically, it could generate a field that prevented other ships from activating their fold drives. Within a certain radius, any vessel caught inside the fold anchor's range would be unable to enter FTL. They would be trapped. This Kofi had explained too. Raya is how we win. The V-Thari are faster than us. Their ships are better than ours in almost every way. If they can run, they will run, and they will come back with a bigger fleet. We cannot let them run. We need to hold them in place and finish them. A trap, said Raya. A cage, said Kofi. We let them in and then we do not let them out. The crew came together over the final months, 350 men and women from 41 countries, pilots, gunners, engineers, medics, communication specialists, damn it, control teams. They trained in simulators that Lena's team had built. Using data from the alien systems, they ran scenarios, hundreds of them, thousands of them, attack patterns, defensive maneuvers, system failures, hull breaches, every possible disaster, every possible opportunity, practiced again and again until the responses were automatic. Raya drove them hard. She was not cruel, but she was relentless. She expected excellence, and she did not accept excuses. She learned every crew member's name. She learned their strengths and their weaknesses. She ate with them in the mess hall and trained with them in the simulators and stood with them on the observation deck of the Prometheus when they needed someone to talk to. They were afraid, all of them. They were about to fight the first battle in human history against an alien enemy in a ship that was held together by alien technology and human stubbornness. The odds were not good. The V-Thari had been fighting wars in space for longer than human civilization had existed. Their ships were purpose-built for combat. The Prometheus was a rebuilt cargo hauler with jury-rigged weapons and an untested crew, but Raya had learned something in her years of command. Fear was not the enemy. Fear was a tool. Fear kept you sharp. Fear kept you alive. The enemy was despair, the belief that you could not win, that the fight was pointless, that you were too small and too weak to matter. She would not allow despair on her ship. The 12 escort frigates were completed 2 months before the deadline. They were smaller, faster, and less heavily armed than the Prometheus, but they were built with the same hybrid technology. On each one carried rail guns, missile pods, and basic shields. Each one was crewed by 60 men and women who had trained alongside the Prometheus crew. Each one was commanded by an officer that Raya had personally selected and personally trusted. Together the Prometheus and its 12 frigates, they were the United Earth Fleet, the first fleet in human history designed to fight among the stars. It was not much, 13 ships against 5, a rebuilt cargo hauler, and 12 small frigates against purpose-built alien warships from a civilization that had ruled the stars for millennia. But it was what they had, and it would have to be enough. On the last day before launch, Raya stood alone in the bridge of the Prometheus. The workstations were dark, the tactical displays were empty. The only light came from the soft glow of the alien power conduits running through the walls, casting everything in a pale blue shimmer. She stood at the central command chair, her chair, and placed her hand on its armrest. The ship hummed beneath her feet. She could feel it, the vibration of the power systems, the pulse of the hybrid energy grid, the quiet, constant heartbeat of area running through its systems. The ship was alive. Not alive the way a person was alive. Not alive the way an animal was alive. But alive in the way that something with purpose is alive. It had been dead. It had been thrown away, and now it was awake, rebuilt, reborn, and ready. Arya, said Raya. Yes, Captain, said Arya. The AI's voice was calm, neutral, and human. It had been designed that way to put the crew at ease. It came from speakers in the ceiling, gentle and clear. Status of all systems. All systems nominal, Captain. Rift cannon charged and standing by. Railgun batteries loaded. Missile tubes armed. Shields at full capacity. Fold anchor ready. The ship is ready, and the fleet. All 12 frigates report ready status. Crews aboard. Systems nominal. They are waiting for your order. Raya was quiet. For a moment, she thought about the Vithari somewhere out there in the darkness between the stars racing toward Earth. She thought about their 5 warships, sleek and powerful and ancient. She thought about their commander, whoever that was, probably sitting in a comfortable chair on a well-built bridge, confident and calm, expecting to arrive at a primitive world and collect a piece of garbage. When she thought about the crew sleeping in their quarters below her, 350 hearts beating, 350 pairs of lungs breathing the recycled air of an alien ship that humans had made their own. They were counting on her. Earth was counting on her. Every person on the planet, every child and parent and worker and dreamer, all of them looking up at the sky and hoping that the stars would not swallow them. She closed her hand around the armrest. Then we are ready, she said. The next morning, the Vithari scout fleet dropped out of faster than light travel. At the edge of the solar system, 5 ships, beautiful, deadly, built by a civilization that had been traveling between stars since before humans had learned to write. They formed a perfect formation and began to move inward toward Earth, out toward the signal that had brought them here, and they sent a message. It was broadcast on all frequencies in the Vithari language with the cold confidence of a species that had never been challenged by anything it considered beneath it. Indigenous species of Sol 3, you are in possession of Vithari property. Surrender the wreckage immediately. You have 1 planetary rotation to comply. Failure will result in reclamation by force. Raya read the message on her bridge. Her crew was at their stations. Her fleet was in position, hidden behind the moon, engines cold, systems dark. She read the message once slowly, and Then she looked up at the faces around her. She saw fear, she saw determination, she saw the quiet burning anger that every human on the ship carried, when the anger that had started the day the aliens had called them irrelevant and had never gone away. She smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a woman who had spent 9 months preparing for this exact moment. One rotation, she said. That is generous. We only need 10 minutes. She turned to her communications officer. No response. Let them wait. Let them wonder. Then she turned to the rest of her bridge crew and said the words that would begin the first battle between humanity and the stars. All stations, battle ready. Bring the fleet to full power. We go in quiet and we go in fast. They came here expecting to find garbage. She paused. Her eyes were steady. Her voice was iron. Let us show them what we built from it. The Prometheus powered up. Its hybrid engines roared to life. Its shields shimmered into existence. Its weapon systems came online one by one like a predator opening its eyes. Behind it 12 frigates followed, engines blazing, falling into attack formation. The United Earth Fleet moved out from behind the moon and into the darkness of space, toward 5 alien warships, toward the unknown, toward the first battle of a war that nobody on Earth had asked for, but that every human on Earth was ready to fight. The stars watched. They always watched, but for the first time they had something worth watching. Fleet Senior Theek of the Vithari Dominion stood on the command platform of his flagship, the Velkarath, and looked at the tactical display with mild irritation. The journey to the Sol system had been long, boring. The kind of assignment that was given to officers who had not impressed their superiors enough to earn something better, a routine inspection of a debris field in an irrelevant star system. The only reason a scout fleet had been sent at all, 5 warships, 200 crew members, enough firepower to glass a small moon, was that the energy readings from the Sol system had been unusual. Something down there was active, something that should not have been active, because the only thing in the Sol system that belonged to the Vithari was a broken cargo hauler that had been dumped there years ago. They had reviewed the file on the solar system during the journey. It was thin. The system contained one habitable planet, the third from its star, populated by an indigenous species that had not yet achieved faster than light travel. The species was classified as precont, non-relevant. They had primitive nuclear technology, basic spaceflight capability limited to their own planetary system, and a history of constant warfare among themselves. They were, in the estimation of the Galactic Union's xenological survey teams, unremarkable. The RAC had spent approximately 4 minutes reading the file and had then closed it and gone to eat dinner. He expected this mission to take less than a day. Arrive, scan the debris, confirm that the anomalous readings were just a malfunction in the old hauler's failing systems, and leave. Perhaps collect the debris if it was easy enough, perhaps not. It was, after all, just garbage. The fleet dropped out of FTL at the outer edge of the Sol system near the orbit of the 8th planet. Standard procedure. ACA always arrive at a safe distance, scan, and then approach. The order, the standard scans, and waited. The scans came back clean. No threats, no ships, no energy signatures except the faint familiar reading of the old Ketharan coming from somewhere near the 3rd planet. Indigenous species had some basic satellites and a few crude space stations in orbit, but nothing that registered as a concern. Theorak broadcast the standard reclamation message. He did not bother translating it into the local language if the primitives were smart enough to understand it. Good. If not, it did not matter. He gave them one planetary rotation to comply, which was generous. He could have given them less. He could have given them nothing. Then he ordered his fleet to advance toward the inner system at standard cruising speed. That was his first mistake. His second mistake was not paying attention to the moon. The tactical officer on the Velkarath, a young Vithari named Sup. Officer Crane, noticed something odd. Approximately 2 hours into the approach, a brief energy fluctuation near the third planet's natural satellite. It was small. It lasted less than a second. It could have been solar interference. It could have been an instrument glitch. On any other day, Crane would have logged it and moved on, but something about it bothered her. The fluctuation had a signature that she recognized, not consciously but somewhere in the back of her training in the years of academy courses and simulation exercises that every Vari naval officer went through. It looked like a power-up sequence. It looked like something turning on. She reported it to Thyra. He glanced at the data, flicked his secondary eyes in the Vithari equivalent of a shrug, and told her to keep monitoring. It was probably nothing. What could possibly be hiding behind a moon in a system that did not even have FTL travel? That was his third mistake. It was also his last one. That did not cost him a ship. The United Earth fleet came around the moon in a formation that human tacticians called the Arrowhead. The Prometheus at the tip, 6 frigates on each flank, spread wide enough to cover a broad attack front, but tight enough to provide mutual support. They were running dark. No active sensors, no communications, no emissions of any kind. They had been sitting behind the moon for 6 hours. Systems cold, crews silent, waiting. Raya Singh had ordered absolute silence. No talking, no movement, and nothing that could produce an energy signature that Vithari sensors might detect. Now silence was over. All ships full power, said Raya. Her voice was steady. Her hands were steady. Nothing about her showed the hammering of her heart, the tightness in her chest, the primitive animal part of her brain that was screaming at her to run and hide because there were alien warships out there and she was about to pick a fight with them. She had trained herself to put that voice in a box and close the lid. The voice could scream all it wanted. She had a job to do. The Prometheus came alive. Its hybrid engine surged, pushing the massive ship forward with an acceleration that should have been impossible for something its size. The gravity plates kept the crew pinned to the deck, compensating for the brutal G-forces. The shields activated layered barriers of energy that shimmered around the hull like heat haze rising from hot pavement. The weapon systems armed. The rift cannon began its charging sequence, a deep vibration that the crew could feel in their bones, like standing next to a church organ playing a note too low to hear. The tactical display changed. Where there had been nothing, there was now something. 13 contacts, 13 energy signatures. One of them was large, very large, and its energy profile was wrong. Fleet Senior said, and there was something in her voice that Thyra had never heard before. The large contact, its base signature, matches the Ketharan Thyra looked at the data. She was right. Buried under layers of unfamiliar energy. Readings, the core signature was the same as the old cargo hauler, but the ship attached to that signature was not a cargo hauler. It was something else. Entirely, it was armed. It was shielded. It was moving faster than any cargo hauler in the Bethari fleet. That is not possible, said Thier, Fleet Senior. The weapon signatures do not match anything. In our database, the shield harmonics are unknown. The propulsion system appears to be a hybrid configuration. That I said that is not possible, the repeated. His voice was sharp, his four eyes narrowed. He was not afraid, Vithari. Fleet Seniors did not feel fear, or at least they told themselves they did not. But he was confused, and confusion in combat was dangerous. He made a decision, a reasonable decision by Vithari standards. He ordered his fleet into a defensive formation and opened a communication channel to the approaching ships. Well, he would demand an explanation. He would assert Vithari authority. The primitives had clearly done something to the wreck, and they would surrender it and explain themselves, or he would take it by force. He never got the chance to send that message. Raya gave the order when the range closed to 92 km. The Rift cannon had been charging for 7 minutes. It was ready. Fire, she said. Kofi Asant, who was standing at the weapon station, because he trusted no one else to fire. His creation for the first time pressed the firing command. The Prometheus shuddered. The lights flickered. Every screen on the bridge went white for half a second, and in front of the ship, in the empty space between the human fleet and the Vithari formation, something happened that had never happened before in the history of the solar system. So, space tore. The rift opened like a wound. In the universe, it was not large. It was perhaps 200 m across, but it was absolute. Inside the rift, the laws of physics that govern the normal universe simply stopped working. Light bent. Matter came apart. Energy scattered into frequencies that had no name. It was for the brief moment of its existence a whole. In reality, the rift opened directly in the center of the Vithari formation. 2 of the 5 ships were caught in it. The first, a light scout designated, was hit dead center. One moment it was there, a sleek, beautiful warship, 160 m long, crewed by 42 Vithari souls. The next moment it was not there. It did not explode. It did not break apart. It simply ceased to exist. The rift swallowed it the way a river swallows a leaf, just completely and without effort. The second ship, a heavy scout called the Velrun, was caught at the edge of the rift. It was not destroyed instantly, but the spatial distortion ripped through its port side, tearing away the engine section in half. The hull, the ship tumbled, venting atmosphere and debris, its power systems failing, its crew dying. It would drift for hours before the last of its systems went dark. In the space of 3 seconds, Theek had lost 2 of his 5 ships, 40% of his fleet gone. The bridge of the Velkarath erupted into chaos. Warning alarms screamed. Tactical displays flashed red. Officers shouted. Reports, contacts, damage assessments, weapon signatures, all overlapping, all urgent. Therak stood in the middle of it and felt something he had never felt before in his military career. Something cold and sharp, like a blade pressed against his throat. This was not possible. This could not be happening. He was a fleet senior of the Vithari Dominion. His ships were among the finest in the galactic union. The species on this planet, this irrelevant, primitive, forgotten planet could not have done this, but they had all ships. Return fire, he roared, full power to forward weapons, target the large vessel. The 3 surviving Vithari ships opened fire, plasma lances concentrated. Beams of superheated energy stabbed across the void toward the Prometheus. Guided torpedoes launched from wing-mounted tubes, accelerating to enormous speeds, homing in on the human ship's energy signature. It was the standard Vithari combat response. It was devastating against any known enemy. The Prometheus shook. Raya gripped her chair as the ship vibrated under the impact of the first plasma lance. The shields flared bright, angry, struggling, but they held. The alien weapon delivered enormous energy, but it was calibrated for known shield types, known frequencies, known defensive technologies. The Prometheus carried shields that were none of those things. They were hybrid alien emitters, layered with human electromagnetic barriers, and they operated on frequencies that Vithari weapons had never been designed to penetrate. Shield status, said Raya. Shields holding at 71%. Reported area, the Vithari plasma lances are partially effective. I am adjusting shield harmonics to compensate. Estimated shield effectiveness improved by 14% after adjustment. 14%. The AI was learning. It was analyzing the enemy weapons in real time and adapting the shields to counter them. The V3 ships had no such capability. Their systems were static, fixed, designed to work perfectly without needing to change. They were fighting the way they always fought. The humans were fighting the way humans always fought. They were improvising. Frigates execute attack pattern Delta. Raya ordered, target their flanking ships. Rail guns full salvo. The 12 frigates broke formation and swept outward in 2 groups of 6, arcing around the Vari fleet like the jaws of a closing trap. They were smaller than the Vithari ships, faster and far more agile. Their human pilots flew with the aggressive, creative recklessness that human combat pilots had been famous for since the first airplanes had carried guns. Wick. They did not follow textbook maneuvers. They did not form neat lines. They swarmed. The rail guns fired. 48 guns on the Prometheus, 6 guns on each frigate. 320 rail gun projectiles Streve alone. Each one was a solid slug of depleted uranium wrapped in stellite, accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light. They were invisible to the naked eye. They arrived almost as fast as the light that would have revealed them. The Vithari had shields, good shields that had been built by one of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Those shields stopped plasma beams and energy weapons and guided torpedoes, the standard weapons of galactic warfare. They were not designed to stop solid objects moving at relativistic speeds. The first salvo of railgun slugs hit the Vari ship. Velcrush on its starboard flank. Some of the slugs were deflected by the shields, their energy absorbed and dispersed, but the shields had been designed for energy weapons. They struggled against kinetic impact. Some slugs punched through. They hit the hull. They went through the hull. They went through the interior of the ship, through walls and decks and machinery and crew compartments, and they came out the other side. Velcro staggered, atmosphere vented. From a dozen punctures, interior systems failed. Fires started in compartments that had never been designed to burn. The ship was not dead, not yet, but it was wounded badly, and it had happened. In seconds, the Vithari torpedoes reached the Prometheus, one of the ship's point defense systems, rapid-fire rail gun. Turrets guided by Arya engaged them. Most were destroyed in flight, swatted down like insects. Two got through. They hit the shields buckled. Strained and held, the ship rocked. Conduits somewhere in the lower decks burst and sprayed coolant across a corridor. Damage control teams were already running. Rift cannon status, said Raya. Charging, said Kofi. 4 minutes to ready. 4 minutes. An eternity in combat. They would have to survive 4 minutes without their most powerful weapon. Then we do it the old-fashioned way, said Raya. Helm close. The range, all railgun batteries. Continuous fire, missile pods target the damaged ship. Finish it. The Prometheus surged forward, engines roaring, closing the distance to the Vithari fleet. It was a move that no Vithari commander would have expected, because no sane Vithari commander would have done it. In galactic naval doctrine, the larger ship stayed at range and used its superior weapons to destroy the enemy from a distance. Charging forward into close combat was reckless. It was dangerous. It was foolish. It was very, very human. The missile pods opened. 240 missiles launched in a rippling wave, their engines burning white hot as they accelerated toward the crippled Velcresh, the Vithari ship's point defense systems already strained by damage. Tried to stop them. They destroyed many. They did not destroy enough. The exotic matter warheads struck the Velkers' shields and detonated. The explosions were not like normal explosions. They were silent, brilliant and wrong. What, as if someone had torn small holes in the universe and let something else look through. The shields of the Velcresh collapsed. The next wave of missiles hit the hole directly. The Velcresh broke apart. It did not go quietly. It went the way all warships go when they die. In fire, in silence, in the expanding cloud of debris and atmosphere, and everything that used to be a ship and a crew and a thing that mattered. 3 ships down, 2 remaining. Theorax flagship and 1 escort. Theorex was not thinking clearly anymore. The cold, sharp feeling in his throat had spread to his whole body. He had lost 3 ships to a species that should not have been able to build a satellite, much less a weapon that could tear holes in space. His mind was racing through possibilities, reinforcements, retreat, even surrender, and every possibility was worse than the last. Velkarth to Dominion Command, he said, his voice tight. Emergency beacon. Priority 1, we are under attack. Repeat, we are under attack in the Sol system. Indigenous species has weaponized the Keth Varen debris. Requesting immediate reinforcement. We are the communications officer turned to him with wide eyes, all 4 of them. Fleet Senior, our FTL drive is not responding. The felt the cold reach his stomach. Explain, I cannot explain. Fleet Senior, the drive is functional. All systems show nominal, but when I attempt to engage, nothing happens. It is as if subspace itself is not there, as if something is preventing us from accessing it. The fold anchor, Kofi. Asant's final gift, the Prometheus had activated it the moment the battle began, so a field of spatial disruption, invisible, undetectable by Vari sensors, radiating outward from the Prometheus in a sphere that encompassed the entire battle area. Inside that sphere, the fold of space that FTL drives used to travel could not form. The fabric of subspace was being held flat like a sheet of paper being pressed against a table. You could not fold what was being held down. Vithari were trapped. Fleet Senior, said Crane, and her voice was barely a whisper. We cannot run. They stood on his command platform and looked at the tactical display, 2 of his ships against 13 human vessels. His shields were taking fire from multiple directions. His weapons were hitting the human ships, doing damage but not enough. Their strange hybrid shields kept adapting, kept changing frequency, and kept refusing to die the way they were supposed to. And the large ship, the rebuilt Keth Veron, was closing in. And somewhere inside it, that terrible weapon was charging again. He had 2 choices: fight and die, or surrender and live. There was a proud officer. He was Vari. His species had built an empire that spanned 1,000 star systems. They did not surrender. They had never surrendered to a species that they considered inferior, and they considered every species inferior. But Thyra was also not a fool. He had 200 crew members on his 2 remaining ships, 200 lives. And the battle was already lost. It had been lost the moment the rift had opened and swallowed the Velton whole. It had been lost perhaps long before that. Lost in the arrogance that had led the Vethari to dump a ship full of advanced technology on a planet they thought was full of primitives. All ships cease fire, said his voice was hollow. Lower shields, cut engines. Broadcast on all frequencies. We surrender. The bridge was silent. Every officer stared at him. Crane's eyes were wide with something that might have been shock or might have been relief. Fleet Senior, said his executive officer, a senior veteran named Dra, if we surrender to a precon species, the Dominion, well, the Dominion is not here, said Thyra, and if we do not surrender, we will not be here either. Broadcast the surrender now. The message went out. The human ship stopped firing. The silence that followed was absolute. The silence of space, the silence of 2 species looking at each other across the void, one in shock and one in disbelief. Both of them trying to understand what had just happened. On the bridge of the Prometheus, Raya Singh sat back in her chair and let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding. Her hands were shaking. She gripped the armrests of her chair to stop them. Arya, she said, confirm the surrender. Confirmed, Captain. Both remaining Vithari vessels have lowered shields, powered down weapons, and cut engines. They are broadcasting a surrender signal on all frequencies. The bridge crew was quiet. Then someone, Raya never found out who, started clapping, and then someone else. And then everyone. The bridge of the Prometheus. Why, the bridge of a rebuilt alien cargo hauler crewed by 350 humans from 41 countries erupted in applause and shouts and tears and laughter. Some people hugged each other. Some people fell to their knees. Some people just stood and cried because the tension that had been building for years, since the day the ship had crashed into the Pacific, since the day they had learned what irrelevant meant, had finally broken. Raya let them have it. She let them have their moment of joy and relief and triumph. They had earned it. They had earned it with years of work and months of training and 47 minutes of combat that had nearly killed them all. Then she stood up and said, "That is enough. We have work to do." Secure those ships, get boarding parties ready, and someone get me a channel too. Earth, Anna, they need to know what happened here. The boarding of the Vithari ships was tense but peaceful. Marines from the Prometheus and 3 frigates crossed the void in shuttlecraft and entered the alien vessels through their airlocks. The Vithari crews were gathered in their cargo bays, disarmed and waiting. They were tall, taller than humans by a head, thin and angular with pale gray skin and 4 eyes that moved independently. They wore uniforms of deep blue and silver. They looked at the human Marines with expressions that the humans could not read. Thyra was brought aboard the Prometheus. He was escorted through the corridors of the ship by squad of Marines and taken to a conference room that had been hastily prepared. He walked slowly, his 4 eyes moving constantly, looking at everything. When he saw the alien stellite walls of the Kethveron, familiar in their material but unrecognizable in their configuration, he saw human technology, screens, wiring, equipment grafted onto Vithari systems. He saw the gravity plates in the floor still working, still producing the steady pull that his species had invented thousands of years ago. He saw human crew members going about their business, and they looked back at him with curiosity and weariness and something that looked like pride. He was brought to the conference room. Raya Singh was waiting for him. She stood at the head of the table, still in her combat uniform, her hair slightly loose from its bun, a bruise on her forehead from where she had been thrown against her chair during a particularly hard hit. She looked tired. She looked victorious. The sat down. He looked at the table. He looked at the walls. He looked at the ceiling where alien conduits glowed softly next to human light fixtures. Then he looked at Raya. This was the Kethveron, he said. His voice was deep and rough. The translation came through an earpiece that the human linguists had prepared, converting his words into English with only a slight delay. This was a Category 3 cargo hauler, 30 years old, rated for bulk goods transport, no weapons, no military systems, no combat capability. That is correct, said Raya. This ship was scrap. It was non-rovable. It was dumped in your system because your system was listed as a disposal site, because your species was classified as non-relevant. That is also correct. Theorek was silent for a long time. His 4 eyes blinked, one pair at a time, only in a pattern that meant something in Vithari body language that the humans had not yet learned to read. How, he said finally, how did you do this? This ship had no weapons. This ship could not fight. This ship could barely fly. It was broken. It was useless. It was nothing. Raya looked at him. She thought about all the things she could say. She thought about the speeches and the declarations and the grand statements that this moment seemed to call for. She thought about the years of work, the thousands of people, the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the fear, the anger, the stubborn, burning refusal to accept the label that the galaxy had pinned on humanity like a name tag at a party nobody had invited them to. In the end, she said something simple, something true. You threw it away, she said. We do not throw things away. Theorex stared at her. He did not speak, but something shifted in his expression, in the way his 4 eyes focused on her, in the slight tilt of his head, in the tension of his gray hands on the table. It was something like recognition, something like respect, something like fear, not fear of the woman sitting across from Him not fear of the ship humming around. Them fear of what those things meant. Fear of what it meant that a species, classified as non-relevant, had taken a piece of garbage and turned it into a weapon that had destroyed 3 warships and captured 2 more. Fear of what they would do next, outside the conference room beyond the hull of the Prometheus. The battlefield drifted in silence. Wreckage of 3 Vithari warships floated in the void. Twisted metal and frozen atmosphere in the small, terrible shapes of bodies in the vacuum. The 2 captured ships sat motionless, their engines dark, their crews under guard. The 12 human frigates patrolled the area, their running lights blinking. In the darkness, and behind all of them, visible through the observation ports, Earth hung in the black, blue and white, and green, small and fragile and alive. The planet that had been a dumping ground, the planet that had been irrelevant, the planet that had just won its first battle against the stars. The battle had lasted 47 minutes. In those 47 minutes, everything had changed, not just for Earth, not just for the Vithari, for the entire galaxy. Because somewhere, far away on a 100 different worlds and 100 different systems, the sensors and communication arrays of the Galactic Union had picked up thorax distress signal. They had detected the energy signatures of the battle. They had registered the spatial distortion of the Rift Cannon, a weapon that did not exist in any galactic database built by a species that did not exist in any galactic record of importance. And for the first time in 4,000 years, the 9,000 civilizations of the Galactic Union turned their attention toward a small, unremarkable star on the outer edge of the galaxy and thought, what is happening over there? They were about to find out. The news traveled at the speed of light and then faster. The distress signal, the raw, a desperate transmission he had sent in the final minutes of the battle, reached the nearest Galactic Union communication relay station 14 hours after the battle of Saul ended. The relay station was an automated platform orbiting a dead star, 47 light-years from Earth, one of millions of such stations scattered across the galaxy, passing messages from one end of civilized space to the other, at speeds that made light look like crawling infant. The signal was flagged immediately, not because of its content. Distress signals were common in a galaxy of 9,000 civilizations where pirates and territorial disputes and natural disasters produced emergencies every day. It was flagged because of the sender's location, the SA system, a system that was not supposed to produce distress signals. Because the Sol system was not supposed to contain anything worth being distressed about. The signal was forwarded to the Vithari Dominion's military command. It was forwarded to the Galactic Union's Security Directorate. It was forwarded to the intelligence services of 16 major civilizations that had standing orders to monitor anything unusual within one standard galactic day. The signal and the battle telemetry attached to it had been reviewed by thousands of analysts, strategists, scientists, and politicians across a 100-star systems. The reaction was not uniform. The galaxy was too large and too diverse for any single reaction, but across all those worlds, in all those species, there was one common thread: confusion. A precont species had destroyed a Vithari scout fleet. A species that could not even leave its own solar system had built weapons that did not appear in any galactic database, a species that was listed in the official records as non-relevant had taken a broken cargo hauler, a piece of garbage, a thing so worthless that the Vithari had not bothered to recover it and turned it into a warship that had defeated 5 purpose-built military vessels. This was not supposed to be possible. It violated every model, every prediction, every assumption that the Galactic Union had about how civilizations developed. Precon species did not reverse engineer advanced technology. They did not hybridize alien systems with their own. They certainly did not build weapons that could tear holes in the fabric of space. That kind of innovation required thousands of years of development, its entire academic traditions, vast resources, and the accumulated knowledge of a space-faring civilization. Earth had done it in 8 years. The Galactic Union High Concord convened an emergency session. The High Concord was the closest thing the galaxy had to a government, a vast assembly of representatives from all 9,000 member civilizations meeting in a structure the size of a small moon that orbited the galactic core. It was under normal circumstances a slow and deliberate institution. Debates lasted years. Resolutions took decades. The galaxy was old and patient and did not rush. This was not a normal circumstance. The emergency session was called by the Vithari Dominion, whose ambassador, a tall, thin figure in ceremonial armor, stood before the assembly and demanded a military response. The Vithari were furious and they were humiliated. One of their scout fleets had been destroyed by a species that they had classified as barely more intelligent than animals. The ambassador spoke for 2 hours. He called the humans vermin. He called their weapons abominations. He called for a punitive fleet of 100 warships to be sent to the Sol system to crush the human military capability, confiscate all Vithari technology, and place the planet under permanent quarantine. The assembly listened. Some delegates nodded. The Vithari were powerful. They controlled 1,000 star systems. Their navy was one of the largest in the Union. When the Vithari demanded something, the galaxy usually listened. But then the scholarly enclaves spoke. The scholarly enclaves were a coalition of 11 species whose civilizations were built around the pursuit of knowledge. They were scientists, researchers, archivists. They ran the great universities of the galaxy. They maintained the libraries and the databases and the research stations that kept the sum total of galactic knowledge organized and accessible. They were not military powers. They did not have fleets or armies, but they had influence because in a galaxy of 9,000 civilizations, the species that understood how things worked held a special kind of authority. The enclave representative was a small being, a thin, barely 1 m tall, with 6 limbs and eyes that covered most of its face. Its name was Scholar Premier Vithon, and it had spent the past 20 hours reviewing every piece of data from the Battle of Sol with a team of 300 analysts. Vithon spoke quietly, then always spoke quietly. It did not need to raise its voice because when a scholar Premier spoke, the galaxy listened. The Vithari ambassador calls these humans vermin, said Vithon. I understand his frustration. His fleet was destroyed. His pride is wounded, but I would caution this assembly against making decisions based on wounded pride. I would instead ask this assembly to consider the data. The data was projected onto the vast display screens of the assembly chamber: battle, telemetry, weapon signatures, shield analysis, ship configurations, the technical details of what the humans had built and how they had used it. The humans did not copy Vari technology, said Vithon. That is the critical point that I need this assembly to understand. Copying would be understandable. Copying is what precont species do when they encounter advanced technology. They reproduce it imperfectly, and they use it the way it was designed to be used. The humans did not do this. The humans took Vithari technology and combined it with their own in configurations that no Vithari engineer would have conceived. They hybridized systems that were never designed to work together. They repurposed a full drive, a transportation device, into a spatial distortion weapon. They integrated artificial intelligence into ship combat systems at a level that no civilization in the Union currently uses. Vithon paused, its many eyes blinked slowly. I have studied the development of over 400 spacefaring civilizations. It continued. I have never seen innovation of this speed or this creativity from a species at this stage of development. The humans are not vermin. They are something far more interesting and far more dangerous. They are a species that has been forced to develop under extreme resource scarcity and constant competitive pressure. They did not have the luxury of slow, steady, well-funded technological development. They had to improvise. They had to adapt. They had to make do with whatever was available. Vithon looked directly at the Vithari. Ambassador, you gave them something that was available. You gave them one of the most advanced pieces of technology in the galaxy, and you left it on their doorstep, and instead of being eaten by it, instead of worshiping it, instead of being paralyzed by its complexity, they took it apart, figured out how it worked, and built something better. The assembly was silent. Sending a punitive fleet would be a mistake, said Vithon, not because it would fail, though I am not entirely certain it would succeed given what we have seen, but because it would be a waste. This species is remarkable. They deserve study, not destruction. They deserve contact, not quarantine. The Vithari ambassador protested. Other delegates argued. The merchant guilds, a coalition of trade-focused civilizations, saw opportunity. Species this resourceful, this inventive, could be a valuable partner. New technologies, new perspectives, new markets. The guilds were always thinking about markets. Other factions were more cautious. The drill hierarchy, military civilization that controlled a significant portion of the galaxy's eastern arm, was concerned about the precedent. If humanity had done this in 8 years with a broken cargo hauler, what would they do in 50 years with full access to galactic technology? 100 years, 1,000. The debate raged for 6 days. It was one of the shortest debates in the High Conqueror's history, which told its own story about how seriously the galaxy was taking the situation. In the end, the vote was narrow. The punitive fleet was rejected. Instead, the High Conquered passed a resolution with 3 components. First, a formal diplomatic envoy would be sent to the Sol system. This envoy would make official first contact with humanity, establish communication protocols, and begin the process of diplomatic relations. It would not be Military force, it would be a single. Diplomatic vessel, unarmed, carrying representatives from 12 civilizations, selected for their expertise in xenological contact, second humanity, would be reclassified in the Galactic Union Registry, the old classification. Pre-Kant non-relevant biosphere would be struck from the record. In its place, a new classification would be entered. It took the registry officials several hours to agree on the wording because no species in the history of the Union had ever required this particular designation. The new classification was Emergent Threat Class Civilization. Active monitoring required. Third and most controversially, the B-Thari Dominion would be formally censured for the illegal disposal of advanced technology in a system containing a developing sapient species. The disposal of the Keth Veron had violated the Union's own regulations regarding contact with spaceflight civilizations. The V-Thari had not just dumped a broken ship, they had through their carelessness armed a species that was now capable of challenging Union military forces. The censure carried no immediate penalty, but it was a public humiliation, and the V-Thari would not forget it. The news of the vote reached Earth 8 days later, carried by communication drone that dropped out of FTL near Jupiter and broadcast on the frequencies that the humans had learned from the captured V-Thari ships. Message was in V-Thari, and it took the human linguists less than an hour to translate it. The world reacted. There were celebrations. Of course there were celebrations. Humanity had won its first battle against an alien enemy, and now the galaxy itself was acknowledging their existence. Parades filled the streets of every major city. Flags waved, music played. People wept and laughed and held each other because for the first time in history they knew for certain that they were not alone in the universe, and they knew that they had proven themselves worthy of the universe's attention. But beneath the celebration, the leaders of Earth were thinking, strategists were thinking, scientists were thinking, engineers were thinking. They were thinking about the words emergent threat class civilization. They were thinking about what it meant that the galaxy considered them a threat. They were thinking about what would happen next, the diplomats who were coming, the negotiations that would follow, the alliances and rivalries and dangers that awaited a species that had just crashed its way onto the galactic stage. And they were thinking about ships at the forge. The work had not stopped, it had accelerated. The two captured V-Thari warships were being studied, not just their weapons and shields, which were impressive, but their fold drives, which were intact, functional, complete. Unlike the cracked drive on the KTH Veron, these drives worked. They could fold space. They could travel faster than light. Kofi Asant stood in the engine room of the captured Velkarath, Thyra's former flagship, and looked at the fold drive with eyes that burned with something that was not quite joy and not quite hunger, but was both of those things at once. It was beautiful. A working fold drive, the technology that connected the galaxy, the key to the stars. He reached out and touched the casing. It was warm beneath his fingers, alive, humming with the energy of something that could bend the laws of physics and carry a ship across light years and moments. We can build this, he said to Lena, who stood beside him. Not copy it, build it, improve it. The principles are the same as the Keth Veron's drive but refined, I can see. Where they went with the design, I can. See where they stopped and I can see. Where we can go further, how long? Asked Lena to build a working FTL drive. From scratch using these as templates. 2 years, maybe 3, 2 years said. Lena, she closed her eyes, 2 years in 2 years humanity would have faster than light travel. In 2 years the species that had been confined to a single planet orbiting a single star in a single unremarkable corner of the galaxy would be able to go anywhere, see anything, meet anyone. In 2 years the galaxy would have a new neighbor, and based on what that neighbor had already accomplished with a broken piece of garbage and a bad attitude, the galaxy had every reason to be nervous. On Earth, the United Earth Defense Council, the governing body that had been created to oversee humanity's military response to the Vithari, released a carefully worded statement to the global public. It was broadcast in every language on every channel, transmitted to every device on the planet. We are humanity, native species of Sol 3. We did not ask for contact. We did not ask for your refu. But we will not be ignored, and we will not be moved. Any vessel entering our system with hostile intent will be met with force. When any vessel entering in peace will be welcomed. The choice is yours. The message was also transmitted into deep space, aimed at the galactic core, encoded in 14 known galactic trade languages that had been extracted from the databases of the captured Vithari ships. It was in every sense humanity's introduction to the galactic community, their calling card, their declaration of existence. It was not humble. Humanity was done being humble. Far away in the halls of the Galactic Union, the elder races heard the message. The elder races were the oldest civilizations in the galaxy, beings that had been traveling between stars for millions of years, who had seen empires rise and fall like waves on a beach, who had watched 1,000 young species burst onto the galactic stage with fire in their eyes and ambition in their hearts. And they, the elder races, rarely spoke. They rarely acted. They observed. They remembered. They waited. But this time they spoke. A single statement issued through the ancient communication channels that only the elder races used, heard by every civilization in the Union. We have seen this pattern before. A species forged in isolation, tempered by scarcity and ignited by insult. They are dangerous, not because of what they have built, but because of what they will build next. Watch them carefully. They will not stop. They never stop. That is both their greatest strength and the galaxy's greatest concern. The statement was discussed and debated and analyzed across 10,000 worlds. Some took it as a warning. Some took it as a prediction. Some took it as a compliment. On Earth, the humans took it as a promise. My captain Raya Singh stood on the observation deck of the Prometheus. The ship was in high orbit above Earth, turning slowly, its hull still scarred from the battle. Below her the planet glowed. Blue oceans, white clouds, the brown and green patchwork of continents where 8 billion people lived and worked and dreamed and fought and loved and hoped. Her planet, her home. The stood beside her. He had not been sent home yet. There were negotiations underway, prisoner exchanges, diplomatic protocols, 100 details that needed to be worked out before anyone could go anywhere. In the meantime, Thake had been given quarters on the Prometheus and allowed limited freedom of movement. He was technically a prisoner, but Raya did not treat him like one. She treated him like what he was, a defeated enemy who still deserved respect. They stood in silence for a long time, watching Earth turn below them. Your planet is small, said Thyra. His voice came through the translator, flat, mechanical but carrying something beneath the words that the machine could not quite capture. Yes, said Raya, your species is young. Yes, you have one star, one habitable world. You had no allies, no galactic technology, no knowledge of what existed beyond your own system. That is correct. Theorak was quiet for a moment, then he said, I have served in the Veather Navy for 32 years. I have fought against 11 different species. I have won every battle I have ever fought. Do you know why? No, said Raya, because every species I have fought against developed the same way. They discovered space flight. They joined the galactic community. They learned the standard technologies, the standard tactics, the standard ways of building and fighting and thinking. They became like everyone else, and once they were like everyone else, they were predictable, and predictable enemies are easy to defeat. He looked at her, all four of his eyes focused on her face. You are not predictable, he said. You took a thing that was dead and made it alive. You took a thing that was weak and made it strong. You took a thing that was mine and made it yours, and you did it in ways that I could not have imagined, in ways that my engineers could not have imagined, in ways that my entire civilization could not have imagined. He turned back to the window. I have served in the Bethari Navy for 32 years, he said again, and I have never been afraid of an enemy until now. Raya did not respond. She did not need to. She looked out at the stars, millions of them, billions of them, scattered across the darkness like grains of sand on a black beach, and she thought about what was out there. She thought about the 9,000 civilizations, the ancient empires, and the young democracies, and the trade guilds, and the scholarly enclaves, and the elder races who watched everything and said almost nothing. She thought about the dangers and the opportunities and the vast, terrifying, magnificent unknown that waited beyond the edge of the solar system. She thought about the Kethveron, the lame drifter, a broken cargo hauler that an alien civilization had thrown away like a piece of garbage because they could not be bothered to fix it, a ship that had crossed the galaxy and crashed into an ocean and killed 17,000 people and changed the course of human history, a ship that had been dead, truly dead, a corpse of metal and broken dreams floating in the Pacific until human hands had touched it, until human minds had studied it, until human stubbornness and human creativity and human anger had taken that dead thing and breathed life into it and given it purpose and made it into something that the galaxy had never seen before. She thought about all of that, and she allowed herself a rare smile. Behind her, the Prometheus hummed. Its engines were quiet now, idling in orbit, but she could feel them, the potential, the power, the readiness. The ship was waiting. It had been rebuilt once. It could be rebuilt again. It could be improved. It could be the template for a fleet, for an armada, for a civilization that would spread across the stars and take its place among the 9,000 or the 901. Below them, Earth turned. Above them, the stars shone, and somewhere in the ship, in a laboratory that was always lit and always busy, Kofi Asant was bent over a workbench studying the Schematics of a Vethari fold drive, his fingers moving across a tablet, his eyes bright with the light of a man who could see the future and intended to build it. With his own hands, Lena Vasquez was in the next room on a video call with the newly formed United Earth Starship Development Authority discussing the design specifications for the next generation of human spacecraft, not rebuilt alien ships, not hybrids, ships designed from the ground up by human engineers were using human ingenuity, incorporating everything they had learned from the Vethari and everything they had invented on their own ships that would carry human crews to other stars, ships that would make the galaxy sit up and pay attention, ships that would make the galaxy nervous. The Vethari had called them irrelevant. The Galactic Union had called them a threat. The elder races had called them dangerous. Humanity called themselves something simpler, something that every human child learned before they could walk, before they could talk, before they could understand the vast and complicated universe they had been born into. They called themselves alive, and alive meant growing, alive meant reaching, alive meant taking what the universe threw at you, the insults and the garbage and the dismissals and the contempt, and turning it into something new, something better, something that the universe had never seen before and would never be able to ignore again. They had called Earth a dumping ground. They had called humanity irrelevant. They had thrown their trash on a world they thought was empty and walked away. Without looking back, they would never make that mistake again, because somewhere in the darkness between the stars, in the great humming silence of a galaxy that was just beginning to understand what it was dealing with, a new light was burning, small, fierce, stubborn, growing brighter with every passing day, the light of a species that had been handed garbage and built a future from it, the light of a species that did not know how to stay down, light of humanity, and it was only the